On August 24, 2011, in Jonesboro, Arkansas, a man arrived home after sharing lunch with his wife. He had ice cream in hand for his children. He placed it on the kitchen counter. He never got to give it to them. Minutes later, Mark Despain was lying dead across his kitchen floor, 2 bullets in his back, the ice cream gradually melting as his life faded away. But the most unsettling part of this case isn't the way Mark died. It's the identity of his killer. Those behind it weren't outsiders. They were the people who slept beneath his roof, ate at his table, and whom he had helped succeed for years. This is the story of how an apparently perfect family concealed secrets that ultimately led to murder. A tale of ambition, betrayal, and a plot involving his wife, his father-in-law, and a hitman paid a few thousand. Born in 1977, Mark Evan Despain came from Jonesboro, Arkansas, a quiet city of roughly 70,000 residents in the state's northeastern corner. It was the sort of community where people knew one another and your name could follow you wherever you went. As a young man, Mark was active and played football at Nettleton High School, graduating with the class of 1995. He had a personality that could brighten any room the moment he entered. Mark enjoyed being outside. He took hunting trips with friends, spent weekends at the beach, and developed a passion for scuba diving. Sports mattered to him, and he proudly supported the Valley View Blazers. He belonged to Central Baptist Church, where his faith and community ties ran deep. Everyone who knew Mark Despain described him as a devoted family man who always put his loved ones ahead of himself. Mark first met Michelle Kelly as a teenager. She was 1 year younger and had a daughter, Brooke, from an earlier relationship. After Michelle became pregnant with Mark's baby, both families stepped in. Their position was unmistakable. You marry her. The year was 1996. Mark was 19. Michelle was 18. They were 2 teenagers suddenly facing grown-up responsibilities neither had truly prepared for. Their marriage did not begin with romance. It began with duty. It was a shotgun wedding. Relationships formed through outside pressure instead of genuine choice can sometimes create resentment that remains buried for years before appearing. That does not excuse anything that happened afterward. Nothing can excuse what was done to Mark, but this is a pattern that appears again and again in family crime cases. Even so, Mark treated his obligations seriously. He did more than marry Michelle. He welcomed her daughter Brooke as his own, never separating her from his biological children. Eventually, Mark and Michelle had 2 additional sons, Zach and Blake. Mark entered the real estate business working beside his parents, Jack and Tanner Despain. He began with nothing. There was no inheritance or trust fund. Mark built everything he possessed through hard work. In time, he established his own property appraisal and investment company, running it from his home at 4320 Jenny Lane. Michelle got a job at a local bank and later assumed responsibility for the family business's bookkeeping. She became central to handling the finances. To outsiders, the Despains appeared to embody the American dream. They had a beautiful home in a peaceful neighborhood, 3 children, a successful family business, Sunday church, and the sort of family others envied. Yet, beneath that flawless exterior were fractures nobody could see. The first appeared through Carl Kelly, Michelle's father. Carl had grown up in a modest working-class background, far removed from the financial success his daughter had married into. When he noticed Mark and Michelle becoming more prosperous, he saw an opportunity and saw a chance to benefit from everything they had built. Why labor for outsiders when you could work alongside family? Carl joined the family real estate operation. He began overseeing rental properties, collecting payments from tenants, and dealing with everyday problems. The years passed, he acquired money, influence, and authority inside the family arrangement. Yet with those gains came bitterness. As the owner, Mark treated Carl for exactly what he was, an employee. Mark gave assignments, demanded results, upheld clear professional hierarchy, and Carl resented it. He hated answering to his son-in-law, a younger man, someone who had gotten his teenage daughter pregnant. Their tension quietly intensified over the years, resembling a wound that never fully closes. This kind of situation is more common than most people realize. When a father-in-law becomes an employee of his son-in-law, The usual family hierarchy is turned upside down. The father is expected to be the patriarch, the person who receives respect. Instead, Carl was beneath Mark, required to obey instructions and report to someone he may have regarded as the kid who knocked up his daughter. Such a reversal of authority can consume a man's pride, particularly among older generations where male authority carried enormous weight. The second break proved far more damaging: the conflict with the Despain family itself. Mark first worked closely with his parents, Jack and Tana, but when family and business become intertwined, disagreements often follow. Arguments surfaced over money, control, and direction. Michelle became involved in heated clashes with Jack, Mark's father. The strain continued rising until the nuclear bomb arrived. Michelle accused Jack Despain, Mark's own father, of possessing inappropriate photographs of Brooke, her teenage daughter, on his cell phone. It was a grave accusation that could never simply be withdrawn. Mark, trapped between his wife and his father, sided with Michelle. He submitted an official police report against his own father. The investigation uncovered the reality. The images were selfies Brooke herself had taken while using her grandfather's phone. Nothing criminal had occurred. No charges were filed. But by then, the truth no longer mattered. The harm was already done. Mark completely severed contact with his father. His mother, Tana, was so devastated that she temporarily left Jack. The Despain family was broken apart. The two patriarchs, Jack Despain and Carl Kelly, now despised one another with a fury that would erupt publicly on the day Mark was murdered. I can't help wondering whether this accusation had been deliberately planned. Investigators later proposed that it might have been an attempt to separate Mark from his family and gain control of the finances. Consider it. If Michelle wanted total control of Mark and his money, what better method than destroying his bond with the only people who might recognize something was wrong? If that was the goal, it succeeded completely. Mark lost his parents, his support system, and the people who might have noticed trouble. He became entirely reliant on Michelle and Carl, the very people who would arrange his death. It is a classic manipulation tactic. Isolate the victim. Remove them from everyone who cares about them. Make them rely on you alone. Meanwhile, Mark worked relentlessly day after day to provide for his family. Michelle, however, was leading an entirely separate life, one Mark knew absolutely nothing about. On the surface, everything appeared prosperous and successful, but behind closed doors, the financial situation was a catastrophe. The company had piled up more than $2 million in debt. Unpaid invoices were accumulating, collection letters were showing up in the mail, and properties faced a serious threat of foreclosure. The business Mark believed was flourishing was actually sinking. So who kept the financial records? Who monitored every dollar entering and leaving the company? Michelle. Mark remained unaware of just how severe the financial crisis had become because he trusted his wife completely with the money. He spent his days in the field appraising properties, meeting clients, and performing the work that generated revenue for the company. Michelle's responsibility was supposed to be managing where that money went. Instead, she concealed the reality from him day after day. Yet the financial deception wasn't even the darkest secret she was keeping. Michelle had also begun a hidden affair with a co-worker at the bank, a man only 24 years old, more than 10 years younger than she was. And this went beyond a physical affair or a few secret moments together. Michelle was completely financing his life. She paid his rent. She purchased his groceries. Whenever he needed to move, she paid his relocation costs. In street language, she was his sugar mama, financing his entire lifestyle while her own family's finances were falling apart. So where was that money coming from? The family business, the very company already buried beneath more than $2 million in debt. Every dollar Michelle gave her young lover was money taken away from her family's future. This detail always catches my attention in cases like this. To me, it exposes something significant about Michelle's character. She wasn't merely cheating on her husband. She was deliberately using family resources to finance the affair. Consider what that really meant. Mark worked tirelessly every day, creating what he believed would be a stable future for his wife and children. At the same time, Michelle was draining that future dry, simply to keep a younger man comfortable. Each rent payment she made for her lover represented money that could have gone toward reducing the enormous debt. Every meal she purchased for him was, in a way, nourishment taken away from her own children's table. It showed a degree of selfishness and emotional distance that went well beyond ordinary infidelity. She was knowingly and deliberately undermining her own family while preserving the flawless image of a devoted wife and mother. That requires a particular kind of coldness. Then came the moment that would determine Mark's fate forever. A week before the killing, Mark at last confronted Michelle. Perhaps he had uncovered something. Perhaps the financial crisis had grown too enormous to conceal anymore. Perhaps, after all those years, he simply sensed deep down that something was seriously wrong with his marriage. Whatever prompted that discussion, Mark voiced grave concerns about their relationship. He plainly told Michelle he was thinking about divorce. To Michelle, this was far more than a troubled marriage. It threatened everything she had. Divorce meant surrendering her comfortable way of life. It meant losing access to money, even though much of that money was tied up in debt. It meant her affair becoming known to everyone. The carefully maintained life she had kept hidden would fall apart. Most significantly, something she may have considered above everything else, divorce meant losing the life insurance payment that would follow Mark's death. Mark's mother, Tana, later said that this divorce discussion was precisely when Michelle decided her husband could not be permitted to leave alive. Divorce was not acceptable. Mark needed to die. Michelle and Carl acted fast. They reached out to Johnny Hubbard, a tenant with ties to the criminal world. Hubbard then contacted Terence Odell Barker, called Quallo, a man prepared to murder for payment. The amount offered for Mark Despain's life was between $7 and $10,000. The scheme was straightforward. Draw Mark away from the house, allow the killer inside, then make it look like a burglary. On the morning of August 24, 2011, Michelle texted her father. "It has to be today." Carl replied, "Can you get him to lunch?" Michelle could, and she did. Those 5 words, "It has to be today," remain the most disturbing evidence in the case. Michelle began that morning knowing that day her husband would not make it through the day. She likely smiled at him, perhaps kissed him, while knowing she had arranged his killing. The level of coldness needed for that is almost impossible to comprehend. August 24, 2011. A Wednesday, an ordinary summer morning that would become Mark Despain's final day. Everything began normally. Mark had no idea whatsoever that his wife had just sent a text to her father effectively sentencing him to death. He did not know a killer was being put into place at that exact time, that the scheme was already underway, or that these would be his last hours on Earth. Michelle persuaded Mark to have lunch together, appearing to be an ordinary married couple enjoying a midday meal. There was nothing suspicious about it. As they sat at the restaurant, making casual conversation and pretending to live a normal marriage, Terence Barker travelled to 4320 Jenny Lane. He entered the Despain residence by whatever method the conspirators had arranged and waited for his intended victim to come back. After lunch, Michelle invented a reason to leave separately. Some errand, she said, needed handling. Some obligation that supposedly could not wait. Mark, unaware of anything, drove home by himself. Along the way, he stopped to purchase ice cream for his children. It was a simple, affectionate gesture. A father thinking of his children and hoping to surprise them with something sweet when they returned home from wherever they had been that day. Mark entered his kitchen, placed the ice cream on the counter, and was shot twice in the back from close range. He never saw the face of the person who killed him. There was no opportunity to fight, escape, call for assistance, or do anything to defend himself. He died inside his own home, on the kitchen floor, where his family had eaten countless meals together. As Mark's body lay there becoming cold, the ice cream gradually melted on the counter above him. Mark Despain's life had ended, but everything around him continued moving forward. Not long after the killing, Michelle came back to the house. She later claimed that she had gotten some sort of phone call concerning a problem there, but that explanation never fully made sense and failed under serious scrutiny. Michelle found her husband's body on the kitchen floor. She turned on the home's alarm system. She dialed 911, supposedly facing a moment of unimaginable horror and grief. Yet something seemed wrong from the outset, and experienced investigators noticed it almost immediately. The residence looked as though intruders had torn through it. Drawers stood open. Objects were strewn across different rooms. At first glance, it carried all the obvious signs of a burglary that had gone wrong. But investigators spotted something that didn't fit. The genuinely valuable belongings were still there. Jewelry remained exactly where it had been kept. Electronics a genuine burglar would likely have taken were left untouched. Money that could easily have been grabbed was still sitting in place. The scene resembled a burglary, but something about it felt wrong. It appeared manufactured, almost like someone had seen too many crime programs and attempted to recreate their idea of what a burglary should look like. Michelle's conduct at the scene also immediately concerned the law enforcement officers there. Her tears appeared artificial, almost as though they were being displayed for the first responders instead of coming from genuine sorrow. Her emotional responses shifted dramatically. She could be perfectly composed one moment, suddenly hysterical the next, and then calm again, yet somehow never seemed completely genuine. She appeared much more focused on controlling how others viewed her than on her murdered husband lying only feet away. Detective Vic Brooks with the Jonesboro Police Department immediately picked up on all of these inconsistencies. Years spent investigating crimes had sharpened his instincts, and they told him this wasn't some random burglary that had ended horribly. It was a deliberate murder, with a scene carefully arranged to deceive investigators. And the person most likely responsible was standing directly before him, the grieving widow herself. What unfolded outside the residence was nearly as dramatic and revealing as what had taken place inside. Once yellow police tape was raised around the crime scene, the extended family's two patriarchs came face to face on the front lawn. Carl Kelly, Michelle's father, the man who had helped arrange the killing, and Jack Despain, Mark's father, the man falsely accused and completely estranged from his son for years, confronted one another in full view of everyone there. Carl instantly began shouting profanities at Jack, throwing accusations in front of investigators, unformed officers, curious neighbors, and news cameras that had already reached the scene. Years of hatred between the two men erupted during the most public and completely inappropriate moment imaginable. That confrontation on the front lawn reveals something important about Carl Kelly's psychology, and I think it's worth stopping for a moment to consider what it tells us. His son-in-law has just been murdered. His daughter had just found the body and was supposedly in shock. This should have been a moment of absolute horror and grief, with desperate efforts to comfort family members as they fell apart. But what did Carl do? He instantly turned on Jack Despain, attempting to shift the blame onto someone else before anyone could direct suspicion toward him. That isn't how an innocent man behaves when confronted with sudden tragedy. It's how a guilty man acts when he wants to control the story, planting another suspect in everyone's thoughts before the investigation has even properly started. At first, the case was a maze of conflicting claims. Carl insisted Jack was responsible. Jack told police they should investigate Carl and Michelle. The turning point came from an unlikely source, the streets. Terence Barker couldn't keep quiet. He began boasting about his involvement, something investigators refer to as street yapping. Eventually, that information reached Detective Brooks. Witnesses also said they had seen a battered blue Mercedes near the area on the day Mark was killed. Investigators traced that vehicle to Johnny Hard, but the strongest evidence came from technology. Police secured phone records belonging to Michelle and Carl. They had traded numerous messages before the murder. Many were deleted on the day Mark was killed, but deleted doesn't necessarily mean permanently erased. Forensic experts recovered those messages, including Michelle's text. "It has to be today." The entire conspiracy began coming into focus. Michelle was the mastermind. Carl served as the organizer. Hubbard acted as the connector. Barker was the trigger man. One after another, they started to fall. Terence Barker pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received 35 years. Carl Kelly likewise admitted guilt to first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 35 years and eventually died behind bars from congestive heart failure. Johnny Hard pleaded guilty to hindering apprehension and probation revocation. Then came Michelle. At first, she was charged with capital murder. Prosecutors were seeking the death penalty, but complications surfaced. Evidentiary concerns and dependence on uncertain testimony. In 2013, after speaking with Mark's parents, prosecutors announced they would abandon the death penalty. In 2014, Michelle pleaded guilty to 3 counts of hindering apprehension and prosecution. The capital murder charges were dismissed. She received a 30-year sentence, with parole eligibility after only 5 years. Reports say Michelle was paroled in September 2019, barely 5 years following her sentencing. The life insurance proceeds she pursued after Mark's death became part of civil litigation. Michelle invoked her Fifth Amendment rights and refused to testify. Today, Michelle has vanished from public life. Mark Despain left behind 3 children who lost their father because of their mother and grandfather. Zach, Blake, and Brooke were left facing an unimaginable reality. Jack and Tana Despain lost their son after years of separation caused by false accusations. They never had the chance to mend their relationship. The case appeared online in an episode titled The Root of All Evil, and on Oxygen Snapped, Detective Vic Brooks was honoured for his work. His initial suspicions about the staged burglary eventually helped bring the conspirators to justice. What stays with me most about this case isn't the killing, but everything that came before it. Mark didn't die because of violence. He died because he had been cut off from everyone who might have protected him. First, the false accusation against his father shattered his bond with his parents. Then, Mark's faith in Michelle gave her authority over finances he never realized were falling apart. Finally, when he contemplated divorce, that decision signed his death warrant. Every safeguard Mark should have possessed was removed by the very people who would kill him. Perhaps the cruelest irony is that Mark accepted Brooke as his daughter and loved her without conditions. Her mother then used an accusation involving that girl to sever Mark's relationship with his parents, leaving him isolated from everyone who might have recognized the danger ahead. Mark's final act was purchasing ice cream for his children. He entered his house thinking about making them happy. Instead, he stepped into an ambush arranged by the woman he had loved since adolescence. The ice cream melted. Mark died. Michelle walked out of prison 5 years later. Some crimes can never be repaid. Some justice never feels complete. Mark Despain wasn't murdered by a stranger. He was taken from this world by the woman he met as a teenager, the family he helped build prosperity for, and the people he trusted most. His death wasn't a crime of passion. It was a choice carried out with coldness, patience, and calculation. And for that, a man who loved football, hunting, scuba diving, and his children. A man who worked tirelessly to create a life from nothing. A man who entered his kitchen carrying ice cream, paid the ultimate price. Every case leaves questions behind. What's your verdict? If you enjoyed this investigation, like the video and subscribe to Crime Scene Files for more true crime stories. Tell me your theory and where you're watching from in the comments now. Click the next case on your screen, because the truth is never as simple as it seems.